Hey, very good morning to my friends from Brumley Baptist Church. It is Sunday, the Lord's Day, August 15th, 2021, and I'm glad to be with you here for our study today in Ecclesiastes chapter 7, verses 11 through 22, session 11 in our summer quarterly. And the question today from Ecclesiastes is, where is the balance? The book says we live on a fine line. If we think too lowly of ourselves, we see ourselves as being so broken we're not salvageable. If we think too highly of ourselves, we don't see a need for God or his forgiveness. How do we find the balance, that happy medium between those two extremes? How do we see ourselves as broken and sinful, yet redeemable by a holy and perfect God? That's what we're chasing here today. The wise person realizes God offers wisdom to those who are imperfect. The beginning of wisdom is to realize you're not wise, that you need wisdom from God. And so it's sort of a circular kind of argument. And so because of that, it makes it difficult for some people to fully grasp or maybe to fully comprehend. They don't see it the way that they should. They don't understand it fully the way they should. Ecclesiastes is going to try and help us with that. You'll note the passage. It is from verse 11 down through verse 22. And the running theme has been wisdom. And obviously that's what Ecclesiastes deals with in a great detail. When faced with mortality, when faced with the idea that one day this life will come to an end and you need saving, how do you strike that balance? Again, between knowing yourself and knowing who you are and knowing who God is and what you need from him. How do we get to that happy medium today? That's what we'll try to discover from our passage this morning. Three movements. Let's start with number one, accept it. Wisdom is as good as an inheritance and an advantage to those who see the sun, because wisdom is protection as silver is protection. But the advantage of knowledge is that wisdom preserves the life of its owner. Consider the work of God, for who can straighten out what he has made crooked? In the day of prosperity, be joyful, but in the day of adversity, consider God has made the one as well as the other, so that no one can discover anything that will come after him. Verses 11 and 12 consist of an observation followed by an explanation. The first clause of verse 12 explains the first clause of verse 11, and the second expounds on the second. The main purpose of both verses is to espouse the high value and desirability of wisdom. So wisdom is as good as an inheritance because wisdom is protection. It's an advantage to those who see the sun, which is everyone, as the advantage of knowledge is that it preserves the life of its owner. Solomon is the quote unquote wisest man who ever lived. And he tells us in Proverbs, and he tells us in Ecclesiastes here in multiple places, and all you're getting, get wisdom. Well, what is wisdom? Is it knowledge? Is it intelligence? No, it's something beyond that. It's the application of that knowledge and intelligence. Wisdom is knowing God and knowing who God is. And since you know that, changing your life in order to be who God has called you to be. That's what makes it advantageous. That's what allows verse 12, wisdom to preserve the life of its owner. In verse 13, Solomon asks a rhetorical question, expecting the answer, no one. Who can straighten out what God has made crooked? And the answer is no one, because he's God. He does things that we cannot begin to comprehend, and we certainly could never change. So verse 14, he says this, if we are so powerless to change the way God has made things and what he does, then what can we do? Well, he answers that in verse 14. In the day of prosperity, be happy that God has given you the prosperity. But in the day of adversity, remember that God brought you that day as well. And so in all things, look to God, acknowledge God, look for God in what he is doing in your life, not just in the good things, the happy things, but in the hard days, look for God in your life as well, because he's just as much at work then as he is during those really, really good days. So accept it. Accept the fact that we need wisdom from God. We need him to give that to us in order to go forward. in the good days and in the bad days. Secondly, find balance. In my feudal life, I've seen everything. Someone righteous perishes in spite of his righteousness, and someone wicked lives long in spite of his evil. Don't be excessively righteous and don't be overly wise. Why should you destroy yourself? Don't be excessively wicked and don't be foolish. Why should you die before your time? It is good that you grasp the one and do not let the other slip from your hand, for the one who fears God will end up with both of them. The teacher here observes how the pervasiveness of sin and its effects of the world have messed up every part of human life and virtue. He says, in my feudal life, I've seen everything. Some people who are righteous, who are wise, don't live very long. And some people who are overly wicked seem to live long, prosperous, worldly, successful lives. He says, that doesn't make sense. Well, because if you're trying to only get at living a long life by being righteous, then really you've kind of missed the point of righteousness in the first place. The teacher addressed a false philosophy that seeks the good life through strict religious commitments, meaning if you're excessively righteous, as he says, overly wise, this is referring to being very legalistic and doing certain things only because they're rules to follow, not because of their relationship to God, but because you're just trying to outwardly play a part or play a role or be something that really you're not. Then you'll be righteous only outwardly and not inwardly. He says in verse 17, the opposite's also true. If you live wild and don't obey any rules and don't try to be safe with your life, you'll die way before your time as well. So he says in verse 18, this idea of balance. It is good that you grasp the one and do not let the other slip from your hand. Hang on to both. Be righteous by doing the outward things. Be wise, but also be godly inwardly. The one who fears God will end up with both of them. See, this is the idea of finding balance. You don't want to just outwardly do the things that a Christian should do, but you should do those because that's what Christians should look like in their life. But you don't want to just be a Christian inwardly, because then if you don't have any outward change, there's a big doubt of your inward state. See, both of these things go together. You can't be a Christian outwardly without being one inwardly, and vice versa. See, if you're a Christian inwardly, that's going to show up in your outward life. But if you only do things outwardly, then there may not be any real heart change in your life. God works in both. But find balance in our life. You know, God has given us the time that he has given us. He has blessed us with friends and family and all the blessings and the things of life. And if we have any of those things around us, we are called to enjoy them and find the balance in that. Find the joy in the life that God has given to us. I will tell you, as a dad, there's nothing more that I enjoy or look forward to than seeing my children happy. Whether it's Hannah playing volleyball or cheering at games or being in the band, or it's Eli finishing a Lego project or helping me with the camera on Sunday mornings at church and being so proud of that, or just whatever it is that either one of them are doing. It's not even what they're doing. It's the fact that I know they're happy and joyful in doing those things. And that makes me happy and joyful. When I find that balance of seeing the good all around me, it just reminds me of how good God truly is to us. Lastly, this morning, we need to acknowledge that there is sin in the world. Wisdom makes the wise person stronger than 10 rulers of a city. There's certainly no one righteous on earth who does good and never sins. Don't pay attention to everything people say, or you may hear your servant cursing you. For in your heart, you know that many times you yourself have cursed others. We have to acknowledge that we are all sinners. And even though we strive to find balance and to be what God has called us to be and to enjoy this life that's around us, we have to acknowledge that we're going to mess up. We're going to fall short. We're going to miss the mark on occasion. We're going to not be what he has called us to be. We got to acknowledge that. We have to be upfront about that, because that's just the truth of this life that we live. That there will be times when sin will get to us. And when it does, we need to acknowledge it, because that's how we deal with it. We acknowledge it, we ask God for forgiveness, and then we try to move on with our life. What can we learn from this passage? Well, number one, believers can be certain that what God wants for us is best. God has plans for our life. God has direction for our life. And what he wants is always the very best thing. In that time, we're to live reasonably and balanced. We're to get along with others. We're to be sure that we balance our inward and our outward life, our spiritual and our physical. We're to take care of those things, that they work together, that they serve one another. Then we need to remember that all people are sinners. All people need the grace of God in their life. If we ever forget that, then we're going to be really, really in trouble. We need to remember that we need God's mercy and grace and forgiveness day by day by day. And when we remember that, we find that balance in life that Solomon here has been talking about. Next week, we're going to continue on and think about death. Sadly, it is a theme of Ecclesiastes. It's something that Solomon writes about as he's nearing the last part of his life. It's something that's on his heart and on his mind. And so he's going to teach us some things about it. And I pray that you'll be here with me to learn those things together from Ecclesiastes, the 9th chapter. Until I might see you again, have a good and godly day and go serve your King.